Councillor Peter Argyle.
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Dr. Maggie Buckle.
Yep.
Councillor Aitchison.
Present.
Councillor Bell.
Present.
Councillor Carr.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Cox. No. Councillor Cox. No. Councillor Hutchison.
Present.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Present.
Colin Allenach.
Yeah.
Jerry Donald. No. And Ian Ross. No. If any of those members become present at the meeting, I'll just record it as that they were in attendance.
Thank you very much for that, Mark, and welcome everybody to the Nestrans Board meeting. First off, are there any declarations of interest that members would like to draw to our attention? Just raise your hand. I'm not seeing any, so if we could move to the minute of the last board meeting at 1.2. There is a small adjustment on page 8 at point 2. It should be SPTR2 in the minute there, if we could change that. Anything else that members want to bring up? Then let's agree that. Agreed? Thank you, members. And then next, I'm going to introduce Professor David Gray. Welcome to our meeting, Professor Gray. This is a virtual meeting. We've been meeting like this, as we were discussing earlier, for the best part of a year. You are, of course, the transport policy person in the School of Creative and Cultural Business at Robert Gordon's University. And as we were chatting about earlier, come from Shetland, but you've been here in the Northeast for many years now, and you're also a member sitting on the board of Hightrans as a non-councillor member there. So very welcome, and you know what we'll do is if you could just take us through your presentation or talk. Whichever you have, and then maybe a Q&A at the end of that if we have time. That would be just super. So over to you. Thank you.
Okay, happy to do that. I'll try and share my screen. Usually reasonably nerve-wracking.
Yes,
can everyone see that?
Absolutely, can do.
Right.
No, that went black.
Yeah, it's black at my end too. I don't know why. Oh, I don't know why that's not working. Okay, is that better?
That's it. Fully.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm, as Sandra said, I'm David Gray. I'm Professor of Transport Policy, RGU, and I've been on the board of Hightrans for about 10 years now, so I'm fairly well versed in how regional transport partnerships work, although I think Hightrans or Nestrans, primarily geographically, are kind of two slightly different organisations. But so what Rab asked me to do today is to basically have a look over your new regional transport strategy and to kind of give you my opinion on it. And what I'll talk about today is I'll basically reflect on my my reading of it. It's quite a hefty document, so I've read quite a bit of it in some detail, and some of the rest of it not quite so much detail. So, but I hope I've kind of captured it. I'll set out what I like initially, and then talk about some of the challenges and opportunities involved in you trying to deliver it. I'm going to talk about something which has been termed the Dougherty Gap, after a colleague of mine, Professor Ian Docherty from Stirling University, which is essentially the gap between rhetoric and action when it comes to developing strategy documents. And then I'm going on the final part to talk about what you're required to do to deliver what's called the difficult stuff. And I'll be talking about things like political will, leadership, creating a positive narrative, institutional alignment. I need to underpin all that by kind of creating a political consensus around delivery. So, first of all, your new regional transport strategy, what do I like about it? Well, I think I like its ambition. I like the kind of 6 priorities you set up. At least 5 of them, I'd say, are certainly doable. I talk about the challenge involved with getting a 50-50 modal split later on in the presentation. I think that's perhaps the biggest challenge of the 6 priorities you set out. But I like the ambition of the strategy. I think we've seen bits and pieces of it before over the years in other strategy documents, but again, I'll talk about that later. But overall, I like it, and I like the ambition and what you're setting out to do. I like there's a kind of implicit hierarchy in terms of sustainable transport, which I like, which is focusing primarily on reducing the need to travel and getting a 50-50 and really trying to get people working at home more. I like the kind of 50-50 modal shift target and getting people to travel by more sustainable modes and away from the car, and then decarbonising what's left and looking to kind of have low emission vehicles and bikes and things, but primarily looking at that hierarchy. And I'll talk about why that's appropriate, particularly why there's issues around just trying to decarbonise all vehicles, because that doesn't necessarily address some underlying transport issues. And that's kind of what I was talking about. If you just rush towards decarbonising and low emission vehicles and electric vehicles and hydrogen, this is a slide or basically a slide design I've stolen from a chap called Michael Glotz-Richter, who is based in the municipality of Bremen in Germany and is a kind of well-known European figure in sustainable transport. And he shows this slide in relation to electric vehicles, is that you can basically change all your existing vehicle mix to electric and low carbon vehicles, and you have no kind of demonstrable impact on congestion or traffic flows or getting people into more sustainable walking and cycling modes and things. So you don't actually address many of the kind of underlying structural issues around car dependence and traffic and congestion merely by focusing on pushing towards electric and hydrogen propulsion. So I think that trying to, going back to this slide, reducing the need to travel and delivering a modal shift primarily before we try and decarbonise what is left is the right way to go, and fully in agreement. I also like the emphasis on rapid transit and tram-like vehicles with more bus priority. Again, it's perhaps not necessarily the first time we've seen that in a strategy document from the Northeast, but I think it's absolutely imperative that this is kind of given, this is front and centre. And that's partly because in delivering the previous regional transport strategy, I think Northeast has been very, very successful in delivering on roads projects in particular. And it's been reasonably successful in getting improvements in rail, but I think that the kind of really big public bus and rapid transit investments that are required to get a real step change in bus use have perhaps been less success in those areas and less priorities in those areas. So I think if you are to deliver on getting a 50-50 modal share away from the car and on things like behavioural change and increasing bus use, I think you need to invest and prioritise this rapid transit system. So I'm really keen on that in the strategy. Again, you have tram-like vehicles on two main corridors, but you also need to back that up on other routes with improving the bus network and delivering real bus priority, which is not only just painting lanes on the road, but actually removing road space away from the car towards buses as well, and to cycling and walking. But I like the emphasis on bus. It's kind of much needed and perhaps arguably long overdue. In the Shire, again, I like the emphasis and the recognition of the need to grow demand responsive transport and focus on demand responsive transport. As I say, I'm on the board of Hightrans, so I'm kind of interested in rural accessibility and mobility. And I used this slide on a number of occasions in previous presentations when I talk about how easy or difficult it is to provide bus services in rural Scotland. And I use the slide as this is the easiest place to plan bus services in rural Scotland is on the Isle of Lewis, where there is essentially in the Northern Lewis is one road. All the rural populations cluster along that road. There's one destination where everybody wants to go, and it's very easy to plan a regular and swift public transport network that can compete to some degree with the car. But even in Isle of Lewis, then the services are all supported by the local authority, and they're not necessarily particularly viable. And the last time I spoke to the council, we were looking to kind of thin out some services. So even in the kind of rural area where it's easiest to plan services, then it's a challenge to do so. And then I go to the one where it's the hardest place in Scotland to plan rural transport services, and that's a bit closer to home, because you've got a fairly high and dense rural population, but across places, the farming areas like Buchan, it's quite dispersed along kind of hundreds and hundreds of farms. So a lot of the rural population lives up kind of remote farm tracks, and it's actually quite difficult to plot rural bus services to go through and make them accessible. And even if you manage to do that, where do you want to go? Do you want to go into Aberdeen, or do you want to go to Ellon or Peterhead or across the Turriff or O'Meldrum or Inverurie? There's a number of competing urban centres where you might actually want to travel to. So plotting a bus network that actually serves anyone's needs is very difficult, if not impossible. So that's why it's important to prioritise and fund demand responsive transport, because it's the only really viable way of providing some sort of alternative to the car in these kind of densely populated farming communities. It's a bit easier along D-side for the same reasons as it's easier to plan rural transport networks in Isle of Lewis, because it's a fairly linear population, or a relatively linear population distribution. But in the kind of dispersed farming communities in kind of Banff and particularly Buchan, it's much harder. I like the aspiration for a 50-50 modal split from car and more sustainable modes. I like that aspiration, and I like the ambition on demand management, and the recognition that you need to look at a suite of tools to kind of manage car use, whether that's car parking, workplace parking levies, traffic management, street design, speed reduction measures, and even road user charging. It's a really kind of bold ambition. I think it's a necessary one, and I think it's probably arguably the hardest bit of your strategy to deliver. So that's what I like about the regional transport strategy. I think it's all good, but I've picked out a few things that I really like. Now we'll come to the kind of challenges and opportunities around delivering it. I think I've talked about the need to reallocate road space away from cars towards buses, towards cycles, and particularly towards pedestrians. Again, this seems to be something that we've been talking about for a number of years in the North East and in Aberdeen. And I guess the challenge to those of you who will be required to deliver this is this a time for action, or is it simply going to be more rhetoric? Because this isn't something that pedestrianisation and road space allocation isn't something new. It's something that has been talked about for a number of years, and there's been some delivery, particularly Broad Street, for example, but not a great deal. And I do wonder, in the post-COVID new normal, there's a kind of an opportunity there to do something on road space reallocation. And I wonder if, particularly if some of the kind of changes to working patterns and shopping patterns persist long-term after COVID, that there might be an easier push to do some of these things on pedestrianisation and road space allocation. So I wonder if there's a nettle there to be grasped as we move out of COVID into whatever the shape the new normal takes. I think there's an issue, a challenge around equity. I've highlighted the need to improve public transport for people who use buses rather than for people who drive or take the train. Again, we've been talking about bus improvements in the North East for a number of years. Again, and I'll highlight some documents later, that this is not a new priority, and it's something that I think it's the time to take it seriously. And I do wonder if there's an opportunity, by focusing on rapid transit and bus priority and making bus travel more like tram, where there's an opportunity to attract drivers out of cars and into public transport by making it just a bit more attractive. I think the key challenge is on speed and to make bus travel in and around Aberdeen as quick as it is by car. And I would see there's a kind of strong interrelationship between improving the public transport system and making it more competitive in time, and demand management, road space reallocation, and behavioural change. I think all those things are interlinked if you're looking to really see a step change and towards that 50-50 modal share ambition. Interesting. When the APR was being planned and pushed and kind of there was a battle for hearts and minds about it. Part of the argument for those of us who were perhaps in more of a kind of sustainable bent was that there's a promise that the benefits of the AWPR in terms of removing traffic from Aberdeen would be locked in somehow, and there'd be a range of policies to lock in those benefits. And that kind of that was good enough for me. I was happy to support the AWPR on that basis. But I guess there might be a little frustration that we're still talking about locking in the benefits a year or so, 2 years is it, since the AWPR was open. There was a window of opportunity, I guess, before when it was being constructed to do a bit more on locking in the benefits, and was the opportunity taken? I'll pose the question, but the fact that it's still in the regional transport strategy, we're still talking about locking the benefits, is potentially a source of frustration. But again, COVID and the new COVID normal, traffic's down by about 20% across the network. Is there an opportunity here to take advantage of a second window of opportunity to do a bit more to lock in these benefits through bus priority, road space reallocation, pedestrianisation, investing in more sustainable modes? I hope so. Again, the big one, I do like the ambition for a 50-50 modal split, and I do like the ambition around demand management. We have been here before, those of us who've been involved in transport in the North East, and I guess been at RGU for over 20 years now, and things like road user charging has been on the agenda before. And I guess the challenge is that the North East has been really successful in things like AWPR and Balmedy-Tipperty and Inveraty Bridge and Diamond Bridge, and can you match the record in road enhancement with delivery for other modes? I guess, is there an opportunity there? I think it's just a part of the RTS rather that's probably the most challenging, and will require most of the effort to deliver. I'll leave it there. The Dougherty Gap, this is, as I say, is my colleague Ian Docherty started talking in his talks about the gap between what you put in your shiny new strategy document and what you actually spend your money on. So I've kind of borrowed that from and actually named it the Dougherty Gap, and it's really the gap between rhetoric and action, between kind of planning and doing and what you promise and what you see through to the end. And it's ultimately the gap between strategy and delivery. And I've got 2 or 3 examples of this Dougherty Gap. I'm going to look at firstly the Scottish Government traffic stabilisation target, which is actually one of my favourite ones for a number of reasons. Then I'll look at the first national transport strategy, and then I'll look closer to home at the Aberdeen's SUMP, the award-winning Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan. In 2002, the Scottish Executive set a target to stabilise road traffic volumes at 2001 levels by 2021. So that was the rhetoric, and this was set out in a Scottish Executive Transport Delivery Report, and then what happened after that? Well, not much really. If you look at what the Scottish Executive and then government spent its money on, it continued to kind of spend an awful lot of money on roads, and quite a bit less on rail, and not so much on buses, and not very much at all on active travel. And not much happened. It was hard to discern any kind of progress or action on trying to stabilise traffic levels. There's a couple of dips in that graph, but that's probably more to do with fuel price crises and austerity than any kind of government action to stabilise targets. And one young sage at the time, I don't know ever what happened to this chap, but he said that he did some work on it. We found limited evidence suggests that the existing Scottish executive target seeking to stabilise traffic levels at 2001 levels is on track. And it's certainly hard to discern any kind of action to match the rhetoric on this. But ironically, and this is why it's one of my favourite targets, is what usually happens with these kinds of targets is a bold target is set out by the Scottish Government, then little action really follows, and then it becomes a stretch target, as there seems to be little action in order to meet it. Then a couple of years down the line, it becomes a kind of an aspirational objective or target, and then it's quietly forgotten about. And then the government comes up with a new strategy and comes up with a whole new set of targets, and the original road traffic stabilisation target is forgotten about forever. But the great irony about this one is that because of COVID and traffic across the network falling by 20%, there's actually a reasonable chance that in 2021, road traffic will be stabilised at 2001 levels, and that would be absolutely tremendous if that happened, but not for anything to do with how what government spent its money on or any kind of priorities around that time. But so the Dougherty Gap between setting that target and action to actually deliver it was fairly substantial, it's fair to say. And then I come to Scotland's first national transport strategy. I've got to declare an interest in that because I was actually seconded to work on that for a year. It was published in 2006. And then, unfortunately, it was mainly a Liberal Democrat strategy document. I think it was commissioned by Nicola Stevens, and then it was published under Tavish Scott. And then in kind of mid-2007, just as about 6 months after it was published, then the SNP gained power, and the transport strategy was somewhat put on the top of the shelf and really referred to again. And the problem was that there was nothing essentially wrong with the National Transport Strategy in 2006, other than there was no political consensus around it. It was a Labour Lib Dem document. And so when the SNP came in, there was no kind of political will to deliver on it, no kind of leadership shown to kind of pay lip service to it or say, right, we're still going to deliver on this. There was no kind of positive narrative created around the transport strategy. And there's no kind of alignment of the various kind of institutions of governance to deliver on it. It was pretty much ignored. And there's nothing essentially wrong with it. It was just it wasn't. It had been developed by the previous government. Now, it was kind of a number of years ago, and I haven't got my copy of the 2006 National Transport Strategy to hand, but I'm pretty sure it didn't set out to widen inequalities or increase CO2 emissions or hinder economic growth or damage the health and well-being of people. So some of the rhetoric between the original National Transport Strategy and the second one, which was published in 2020, might have been different, but the aspirations were very much the same. So I'm at a slight loss to. I mean, the first National Transport Strategy I think was done in 2 years. I'm not quite sure why the Scottish Government felt the need to spend almost 4 years on a second one, which essentially set out the same kind of aspirations in slightly different language and different rhetoric, but aspiring to do much the same thing. It struck me as being a kind of quite a long exercise in rearranging the furniture. But again, that's just an observation for today, and I wasn't actually involved at all in the second National Transport Strategy, so I can't really comment that but I think if we did a kind of text analysis of the two documents, there wouldn't be that much divergence. But because one was SNP and the other one was Lib Dem Labour, the first one really doesn't get talked about at all. And then we'll come to the award-winning Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan for Aberdeen, which back in the day won a number, I think a couple of awards for its kind of ambition and scope. But I would pose the question of whether the award-winning Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan led to award-winning sustainable urban mobility. And I think Exhibit A on that would be the modal share for the journey to work in the northeast compared to other kind of city regions in Scotland, and the relatively high and static modal share for the car. I don't think I'll make any more comment on that. I'll just leave that one sitting for you. But I think you might want to reflect on amongst yourself about what the Docherty Gap might be between the plan and the rhetoric and the action on that one. So I guess you guys have got to deliver on your regional transport strategy. I guess you'll be wanting to minimise the Docherty Gap as much as possible. You want to deliver on as much of the strategy as you can, including the hard bits. What do you need to minimise the Dougherty Gap? Well, I think I've kind of hinted at it. You need a degree of political will. You need leadership, not followship. You need to create a positive narrative around it, and you need something called institutional alignment. And all that needs to be underpinned by kind of cross-party long-term political consensus. I'll talk about those briefly. Political will, it's you know all about that. It's really just having the kind of the political drive to see it through. Tony Blair, what happened to him, once said, "We know the problem and we know the solution of sustainable development issues. Political will. We know most of the answers. We know what's required. You set that out in your strategy document. Have you got the political will across the two councils to deliver?" Leadership, not followship. Now, Rab and I have had a couple of exchanges on what happened with road user charging in the Northeast almost 20 years ago, when it was briefly on the agenda locally. My recollection, and don't quote me on this because my memory is far from perfect on this, is that RGU did quite an extensive bit of work with NESDEP, which was the Economic Development Forum, around road user charging in Aberdeen to fund transport infrastructure. And there was certainly a launch event, and I think one of the councils endorsed it at a committee, and then the kind of backlash from the local press and Aberdeen journals was such that the other council a couple of days later basically backed away from it and rejected it. So it was kind of pretty much a lame duck policy that never went anywhere. That's my kind of recollection of events. I think Rab maybe a slightly different one, but there was certainly, it was on the agenda for about 3 days and then left the agenda because of the reaction in the local press about charging motorists to drive in Aberdeen. So in that occasion, I think some of the political leaders were guilty of followship in terms of worrying about what the local press was saying rather than maybe sticking to their guns. So if you are to deliver some of the hard stuff in the regional transport strategy and you want to minimise the Dougherty Gap, you're going to have to demonstrate leadership and not necessarily followship in reaction to maybe some bad headlines or some kind of challenging public opinion. And this is sort of similar to the work I've talked about that RGU did with NESDEP, and we did a survey, a postal survey, where we asked this particular question: if all the revenues were spent on the schemes aimed at reducing congestion, improving the transport system in around Aberdeen, would you prepare to pay a modest charge to drive in Aberdeen? And in our survey, 42% of respondents said yes. And then the Aberdeen Evening Express ran exactly the same question in their own survey, and 8% said yes. And I use this actually in when I teach students about research methods and research design. And I asked them, well, how come in one survey 42% of respondents said yes, and another one 8% said yes? Well, the explanation is in our survey, we basically started off the survey with all the things that the investment would pay for. Oh, would you like an improved bus service? Would you like kind of trams? Would you like Crossrail? Would you like the AWPR? And of course, people go, yes, yes, yes. And then we essentially asked them, would you like to pay a bit more to drive in Aberdeen to pay for this? And almost half the respondents said yes. What the Evening Express did was they said, under the headline of motorists will be charged more to drive in Aberdeen, and a fairly kind of negative piece on you're going to have to pay more to do what you already do for inverted commas free. If you say yes or no, please phone this number. So it's a kind of self-selecting survey of people who might be cross enough to who didn't want to pay more for what they already do in Aberdeen for free, and 92%, not surprisingly, said they didn't want that. I think, as I said to my students, the miracle was that 8% actually phoned up and said yes, they would be prepared to pay a modest charge to drive in Aberdeen without any necessarily any benefits. So the moral of the story is you need to kind of create a positive narrative around this, because some of the things you're trying to do will have fantastic long-term benefits, but they might have short to medium-term negative impacts, which people might not like. So you've got to create a positive narrative and emphasize how much people will benefit in the long term by doing some of these things, which will be difficult. And as I say, might not be popular with the travelling public in the short term, and might not be popular with other kind of stakeholders and the press. I've done a lot of work in recent years on something called institutional alignment. And that's kind of the idea is, if you're going to do big, difficult stuff, you need to get all the institutions involved in delivery and governance singing from the same hymn sheet. If you're going to deliver on things like rapid transit, you're going to have all your local stakeholders and champions creating a positive narrative about it, and everyone, all the various parts of the council, all the different departments sign up to this and trying to deliver on it, and all being aware of what you're trying to do and all being signed up. And the example I use is Malmo in Sweden, where the municipality and all the stakeholders are basically aligned to making it a cycle priority city, where the cycling and walking take far greater priority over the car, traffic lights, in terms of road space, in terms of how the city's planned, in terms of economic development. And the building here is Cykelhuset at Malmo, which is a car-free, cycle-friendly apartment and hotel block, where there's no car parking spaces, and every apartment has a couple of bike spaces. And that's a kind of logical extension of where Malmo has been going for a number of years, and where that kind of prioritised and sustainable transport can take you. Now Aberdeen's a long way from that, but to actually do one of the cities that really delivers on sustainable transport, whether it's Freiburg, Malmo, Helsinki, Copenhagen, you have to have all your institutions of governance signed up to delivery. And Malmo was different from Aberdeen. It basically lost its shipbuilding overnight. It reinvented itself as a kind of sustainable city to attract investment. But it shows what you can do if you have whether your health boards, your councils, your economic development agencies, have all your kind of institutions signed up to sing off the hymn sheet to deliver on the strategy. You can really kind of, you can really do great things. But to do the big things and do the difficult things, you need this institutional alignment. What doesn't work is having a pet project or a pet area, and one part of one council doing a project on something and not having the rest of the council or its wider delivery stakeholders buying into that, because you can't get the big significant change that you're looking for in your RTS. So I've said, how do you minimise the Dougherty Gap? You need political will, you need leadership that follows it, you need to create a positive narrative, you need this institutional alignment to do the big stuff, and you need this long-term political consensus. And in terms of this political consensus, there's a really good case study locally, and that's actually the delivery of the AWPR. And to deliver the bypass, you did have all those things in place. You did have the political will to deliver it and see it through. You had leadership. You had kind of key actors who led it and who set the narrative. You had all the kind of both councils and all sorts of stakeholders aligned to delivering it, and you had a long-term political consensus that this was necessary. And it was originally kind of set out in the 2003 Delivering a Modern Transport System for North East Scotland, and it got delivered. So there is where the North East has a very successful track record on roads, and in particular the AWPR. And I guess the challenge is to focus some of that political will in other areas. And I'll go back to this document in 2003 because I talked about elsewhere about rearranging furniture, and I had a look at this the other day because, as RGU had some involvement in its development, and the 2003 document made reference to light rapid transit. It made reference to bus-only routes and bus priority. It made reference to pedestrianisation in the Aberdeen city centre. It made reference to Crossrail, and all these things reappear in your new RTS. And it seemed to me that with that 2003 document that you were really successful in delivering on the road stuff in that document, but less successful perhaps in some of the other things that have reappeared in the regional transport strategy. So that's probably a good point in which to finish up, and that I do like the RTS. It's got good ambition, and I think we have seen a bit of it before, and talk about rearranging furniture, and you will need to kind of come together and demonstrate political will and leadership to minimise that Dougherty Gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. It is a hefty document, as you said, and I think you've done it justice in pulling out those elements that we did as a board and as all the partners came together when we were looking at the RTS, discussed and so on. Some quite controversial bits in there as well, I have to say. So I see there are a couple of hands up. So I'll go first to Maggie Bochel. Thank you. David probably won't be surprised that I'm likely to disagree with some of what he says because I've been doing it for 20 years. In terms of your suggestion that there hadn't really been a lot of delivery, in particular in terms of road space reallocation and locking in the benefits of the AWPR, I kind of get where you're coming from in that to some extent, but also there has actually been an awful lot that's been done to prepare for that, which may not be so visibly seen to be doing that. So, you know, all of the things like the College Street works, the Walking Street gyratory, you know, the people like Joanna here that will be able to go into that in much more detail. But there has been a lot of work done in the background, and generally I think Nestrans has been pretty good at telling people what we've done and what we've done well, but maybe there's still a bit of a gap there. That, you know, it's a bit about managing people's expectations and how, in terms of how long it can take to implement some of these things, and actually telling people that we've done quite a lot to prepare for that. We just, I do totally accept we've not made that last step to do it. And I also take your point that some of taking that last step is going to be about having that political will and the consensus that you've talked about. In terms of the sump, it was award-winning, but it was award-winning for its stakeholder and citizen participation and not necessarily for the actual content of the sump. So just that award needs to be put in that context. Also agree that maybe it's not been delivered, but that wasn't why it was award-winning. So it's just kind of separating off those two things. In terms of the road user charging, my recollection, I think Sandra probably was on the council at the time it happened, that Aberdeen councillors were always against it, that it wasn't anything to do with what happened in the press, that their concerns were about the fact that Aberdeen would be doing this in isolation, and that if it had been a Scotland
wide thing where every city in Scotland was doing it, then they might have been more open to considering it. But they were concerned that if only Aberdeen did it, it would be economically disadvantageous to Aberdeen, rather than them just reacting to the press. That's my recollection, but you're right, it was a long time ago, and so we've probably all got slightly different memories, but I do remember being at the committee where it was discussed. Presumably it had hit the press before it went. In fact, I think it was a full council meeting, so presumably there was press out there that was reacting to it, but my recollection is we went to the committee knowing full well what the answer was going to be, and that it was because of the perceived economic disadvantages. But enjoyed your presentation, and it was nice hearing the positives as well as the challenges and the opportunities, and I don't disagree with a lot of the challenges and opportunities. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Maggie. I'll maybe take in it was yourself, Councillor Carr next, and then Colin, and then we'll maybe come back to yourself, Alan.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks, David, for a really interesting and thought-provoking challenge, I guess, to where we are and where we're going. I'm going to take a view maybe slightly more, obviously, as representing a rural seat in Aberdeenshire, and I think you're quite right. The interface between rural and city is very, very important. We need the city is very much the playground of the Shire, and the Shire is the playground of the city. So really, we need to get adequate public transport into the rural areas, and it's not by any stretch of the imagination there yet. So we've got a lot of spade work to do, but I do think, and I fully agree, that demand responsive transport is the key for a lot of our rural areas, so that they can connect and interact with the city. I think the experiments recently this last year, especially on the bollards and so on in Aberdeen City, have been a great negative by people in the Shire. That's the feedback I'm getting. People don't want to go anywhere near the city. They see it as congested, confusing, and a lot of people, it should never be underestimated the number of pensioners and older residents that get dropped off in the city to do shopping, to visit businesses and so on, and they're not going anywhere near the city if they feel that they can't access it easily. And the only way that the rural dwellers can do that is by car, because at the moment the other options are just not really there. So that is a challenge in itself. So I think there's a challenge between business and economic activity, making sure that the city and the Shire are connected, because, as you say, the two are inextricably linked, and I think we need to be looking at solutions in both to make the whole thing work, and also to keep our businesses viable, because obviously that's been very much in the press recently, and we need to be welcoming people into the city as much as possible to increase footfall. But thanks very much for your presentation. Found it really interesting. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, George. Colin, do you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate that was really, really interesting. And from my point of view, having been on here now, coming up, I think, a year and a half, I recognised quite a lot of what you said on there. I think some of the things you mentioned that they've done over the past, the AWPR and the political will, because I think that's fairly easy. I think there's not anybody in Aberdeen or Aberdeenshire would have said we don't want it, apart from some of the landowners around the border, but everybody else were for that. The harder decisions are going to be, like you said, the challenge is getting people, if they want to come out of cars. Councillor Carr mentioned about the issues with the spaces for people restrictions that we had in place, and how the positive message of those didn't really get out, and there was quite a lot of backlash about it. And again, at the beachfront, where we had a cycle lane for 7 weeks, the backlash from the press and from some people on social media politically became we couldn't leave that there, or it couldn't be left there because of that, and it had to be ripped up. which was a pity because I think that was a challenge and something we could have used to develop and have a positive message on. But yeah, I recognise that in the last year and a half we put this strategy together, and now starts the hard work of actually delivering on that strategy and making sure that all the actions align with that strategy. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Colin. I have a question about the slide, David, with the Michael Glotz-Richter slide. Was that actually a picture of Aberdeen, of Union Street?
Yeah, I was trying to look for Michael's. I've seen Michael's presentations for about 10 years now, and he always uses the same one in every presentation he does of Bremen. So of the same. So I just thought I'd just pinch one of Aberdeen and do the same slide without and Aberdeenize it. But it's a good slide because it does show that electric vehicles are only one part of the decarbonising agenda, and it doesn't actually do anything for congestion or kind of road use and car dependence.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Guile to come in. If anybody else wants to come in, do so now, because we do have our papers to go through as well. Peter.
Yeah, no, I'll be brief. Thank you, David. That was an interesting presentation. I have to say, though, that a lot of what you spoke about, we spoke about as a board in our various workshops and so on, and certainly recognised in putting together the strategy exactly where the challenges lie. And the biggest and the most fundamental is that whole change of the culture away from car ownership into other modes, and that is not easy to achieve. And political leadership is, for something that is such a radical change in a democracy, it's not simply a question of saying make it so and expecting it to happen, because you have to take people with you. Otherwise, the next time you have an election, everybody who supported it is out and the people who are against it are in, and the whole thing gets reversed. So unless you can show leadership by actually taking people with you, be it road congestion charging or increasing bus lanes or whatever, in a representative democracy, it's very, very difficult. Other things you picked up on around Crossrail, we've actually made considerable progress on Crossrail in terms of the way that the train system is working now, but that is something we've had to lobby for and work for with Transport Scotland, Network Rail, Scottish Government, etc., etc. It's taken a long time, but we've gone from a position where government was saying, forget Crossrail, it's never going to happen, don't ever mention Crossrail to us again, to a point where we, in practice, have a reasonably effective system across Aberdeen, but there's clearly a lot more to do with some more stations and so on. But for these things, it's lobbying, pushing, working with government to get those interventions put in place. And we've got a paper later on around interstation today, which is, just the disability access issue at Inch is something we've been pushing for years, and we've finally got a bit of traction on it. But it's nothing that's in our gift to do, but it's something that we've been working very hard for as a transport partnership. But anyway, thank you for your presentation, David. It was interesting. But I did just want to make the point that the challenges you identify are very much the ones we identified too. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. Just a last word to thank you once again for coming along and addressing us today, giving us a lot to think about going forward. Our regional transport strategy is in with the Minister as we speak, and we'll be hearing about that again further on. You're welcome to stay and listen to what's going on with the rest of the meeting. But can I just say on behalf of everyone, thank you very much for coming along and speaking to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. If we could move on to budget matters, and we've got Chris Smith here, who's going to take us through the first paper at 3.1.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides an update on the partnership's 2021 financial monitoring to the end of February 2021. Appendix 1 details the actual expenditure to the end of February 21 with a forecast outturn to the end of financial year 2021 as well. Appendix 2 details a number of small value variants ahead of the year end for the board's approval. Looking ahead to 21-22, Appendix 3 sets out details of funding required for continuation of projects into financial year 21-22 on both revenue and capital projects. And I'd highlight that, as mentioned in previous reports, COVID-19 has been the main factor in the requirement to carry forward these funds. If we factor in all of the above, and if approved, the forecast operating surplus will be around 29,000 for financial year 2021. I'll add at this point that obviously the draft year-end position for 2021 will be brought to the board meeting in June, with the audited annual accounts to be presented in September 2021. The board are also asked to note the updates in the report detailing additional funding for some elements of the partnership. Chair, 5 recommendations as detailed in the report for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, have you got any questions for Chris on the report that we have in front of us? I'm not seeing any hands, so can we agree those 5 recommendations at page 12 to note the monetary position, approve the variants, approve the revisions, note the updates, and note the strategic transport fund position?
Agreed.
I'm seeing a few nods. Agreed. Thank you. Right, on to the next one, which is the Treasury Management Strategy Statement, Chris.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this report presents the Nestrans Treasury Management Strategy for 21-22, and this is an annual requirement of the partnership to detail both the borrowing and the investment strategy for the financial year ahead. The appendices detail as follows: the prospect for interest rates, Treasury limits, the reporting mechanisms, the use of Treasury advisors, and also the investment strategy of the partnership. I'd like to draw attention to the implications that are highlighted in the report, namely the continued low investment income environment due to the wider economic conditions, and also the update on the partnership's own bankers. And as always, these issues will be monitored closely throughout 21-22 through the SLA with Aberdeenshire Council Finance Service. And on that, just the one recommendation: the board are asked to approve the revised Treasury Management Strategy as set out in Appendices A and B of this report. Thank you.
Any questions, members, on the Treasury Management? I was going to ask, just on page 23, have we ever actually borrowed money through the mechanisms?
Thank you, Chair. No, I mean there'll be short-term investment of the money. Nothing borrowed as such. It's more just the investment of it, just to guarantee some level of investment income for the partnership on the material balances that are held. Okay, understood. Thank you for that. Can we agree, members, to approve the recommendation to the revised treasury management strategy in Appendices A and B? Good stuff.
Great.
Yeah. And then on to the procurement paper on Scotland Excel framework. Paul, I thought I saw your name in.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor MacDonald. Quickly just saying that the councils and Nestrans have for the last 11 years made use of Scotland Excel, which is a partnership of all the 32 local authorities in Scotland to provide collective procurement. We've used a framework that provides access to a range of consultancy experts, and that framework contract ended in March. A new one has commenced for the next 4 years, and it's just seeking approval to use that framework for the next 4 years for the execution of the budget work that we have. Secondly, there is a request that has been advised to us by Procurement Commercial Services that there was a clause in one of the financial regulations which meant that every time we spent over £50,000, we would have to come back to the board for yet more approval of the contracts. And on the advice of Commercial Procurement Services, they suggest getting approval for, say, a £1 million level, so that we don't have to keep on coming back. And that's subject to us following all the other regulations that are in the financial regs about approval to incur expenditure and the appointment of consultants along those. So they're basically, that's the two recommendations of the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Any questions, members, on this? I was going to ask, where are they based, the consultancy services?
The Scotland Excel are based in Paisley, and they're based in the headquarters of Renfrewshire Council. The consultants are typically based, have offices in Scotland, but they can be global entities. ACOM, Arabs, McDonald's, they often have a Scottish presence. Sometimes they have a presence in Aberdeen or the northeast. Most notable, frequently they often have a presence in say, Edinburgh or Glasgow. Thanks for that.
And are members content that we up the from 50,000 to 1 million? It did seem rather a large jump to myself, and I just wondered what the thinking was behind that to go to that particular figure and not say 500,000 or whatever. What was the thinking behind that, given that we have a budget of around 8 million?
Okay, your procurement actually suggested £2 million to me. I thought £2 million was probably overdoing it, and I thought £1 million would be based on historic spend a reasonable figure. If we wanted to go down, I'm very relaxed about that, and we can see how it goes for a couple of financial years and see how that threshold works. I'm not overly precious. I just did not want to overly burden the committee reporting structure.
Councillor Bell, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Spending £1 million without any scrutiny would leave me very, very uncomfortable. I would have thought at most maybe £250,000. That's still a big number. And I appreciate that consultants are expensive, but so what? Lots of things are expensive. So I wouldn't be at all comfortable with that £1 million at all.
Councillor Hutchison.
Councillor Bell said very much what I'm thinking. I'm very happy to be burdened for that amount of money by a lower limit. Is certainly what I'd be kind of much more comfortable with. That's all I've got to say on that.
Jerry Donald, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Chair. I would concur with the councillors there that that seems like an excessive jump, and perhaps even doubling it at this stage, given the fiduciary duty around public funds, would be perhaps more acceptable to myself.
Okay, any others want to come in? I think I would be suggesting perhaps 250,000, but just I think that gives it covers a lot of bases, but not all of them. Councillor Hutchison, you wanted to come back?
Just to say, I'll second you on that if you want to move that.
Can we agree, members, that we approve the use of the framework, but that we, in recommendation 2, we approve multiple call-offs to the tune of 250,000, but that we do come back as a third recommendation and look at that again in the future and understand, if that should be tweaked again.
Agreed.
Agreed, yeah.
Thank you. On to agenda item 4.1. I think that's wrapped.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Item 4.1 is the Director's report, a regular report on meetings that have been going on, etc. I think the first thing I need to do is an apology to the Chair. I say on page 35 that there was a meeting of the RTP chairs. I think it actually clashed with the City Council's full council that day, and Councillor MacDonald was an apology. So apologies for not putting in your apology to the report. In addition to the regular meetings, which are identified there just to give members an indication of progress and what's been going on, I'll draw your attention, if I may, to the appendices. Appendix 1 is a note of the Health and Transport Action Plan meeting, which is chaired by Jerry Donald. Appendix 3 is a note of the Freight Forum, which was held in February. And Appendices 2 and 4 relate to meetings of the Bus Alliance, which has been meeting particularly regularly in recent months because of the development of an application to the Bus Partnership Fund, which I think members are aware that we brought forward a note regarding that opportunity to bid into what is actually a Scottish Government £500 million fund. So the Bus Alliance has pulled together an application which will be led by Aberdeen City Council. It has to be one of the local authorities as lead partner. So Aberdeen City Council will be submitting a bid which will go in, I think, tomorrow, but the deadline is noon Friday. And we're looking at a bid on basically the 4 key priority corridors which have been identified by the Bus Alliance and the city centre, and also for initial development work towards the Aberdeen Rapid Transit Scheme, which obviously formed a key part of our regional transport strategy. So Appendix 5 is a letter of support for that bid, which we've suggested should be signed by the Chair, but just to say that Nestrans are supportive of the principle of developing a Bus Partnership Fund bid, which will be led by the Alliance, by City Council on behalf of the Alliance. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Members, any questions to Rab on any of the contents of the report, particularly the Bus Partnership Fund that he outlined? Councillor Gall, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, very happy with the letter, and if you sign it, I'd be delighted. Just to say for information, I signed a very similar letter on behalf of Aberdeenshire Council yesterday, day before. So we're all good to go, and it's a fantastic bid, and we just need to keep our fingers excessively firmly crossed that there's no competition and we just walk our way through to complete success and can actually deliver some of the things we've been wanting to deliver for years. Thanks.
I love your positivity, and
you have to be sun shining. It's
I know, and I share your hope. I will be happy to. There's a couple of tweaks I was going to make, but nothing of substance. It would just be to sandify it, to be honest. But other than that, happy to do that on behalf of the board. The only thing I was going to ask about, I suppose, was on HTAP, was under the matters arising, where there's a one-page document that was produced around COVID. I just thought that would be useful to share if it was available and was something that members might want to see. From just to give a little bit more detail around that, I think would be very helpful. And a small change on page 40, just that David Phillips was it got me a bit confused, First Bus, because his initials were in as Andrew Jarvis's, but it did make sense going through the report once I'd worked that out. But other than those small items, I don't see any other hands. So if we could go to the recommendations on page 38, note the progress and approve the draft letter. Can we agree to that, members?
Agreed.
stuff. Thank you. And then on to our Regional Transport Strategy 2040 update, and well done to Kirsty and the rest of the team. It is has been submitted, as we've said already. Do you want to just take us through this short report?
Sure. I mean, that's the crux of it, really. It has been submitted. Obviously, we at the meeting on the 10th of February, the board approved with some minor amendments the revised text, and it's since been back through the graphics process, and the final RTS was submitted to the Minister on the 24th of March, along with a covering letter, and was copied to Officers of Transport Scotland. The document's been refreshed. You'll see we've got a new cover. We've moved away from the purple of the consultation to a sort of more Nestrans blue, and the Nestrans 2040 website has been updated to sort of align with all that. So you'll see the imagery matches very much the new document. So the full suite of documents, including the RTS, are all available now to download on the Nestrans 2040 website. And we've also uploaded the spreadsheet of all the consultation comments, how we've responded to them and how that sort of informed the strategy. So that is now all available. We've had confirmation from Transport Scotland that they've received it, that they are looking at it. I suspect we won't get a response before the election. It'll be after that, but they have it in hand. So fingers crossed.
Thank you very much for that. I was going to ask, I don't see any hands up, but I was going to ask about those comments and points that members of the public or institutions made. How are we going to respond to let them know that is there going forward, Kirsty?
Yeah, I think we can certainly get back to everybody who responded to the consultation. We've got contact details, so we can now sort of, I guess, send back this is the final version and this is where all the information is made. I think probably we can also do something through the social media channels as well, just to let people know that it's now been finalised, obviously subject to approval. But yeah, we can certainly get in touch with all of the people and organisations who responded directly.
And it might be better to do that after hopefully the approval comes through. Would that be your thinking, just to do it the once, rather than go back again and say, in case there are any changes that the minister does make? That might make more sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends very much on what kind of comments come through and how much rethinking we might have to do, and that, I guess, maybe would affect. So I think, yeah, if we can do it the once and it's a bigger story once it's adopted. But it's certainly all there, so if anybody is interested to look at it, we can point them in that direction.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I don't see any hands, so can we, it's a noting report, so if we could note that report, that would be great. Thanks very much. Okay, then on to STPR2, the Strategic Transport Projects Review. I think that's going to be Paul, is that you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor MacDonald. Transport Scotland published an update report on their Strategic Transport Projects Review just before the last board. We didn't have time to properly consider it at the last board because it was just like a couple of days before the actual board. And then for the feedback was at the end of March. So what's happened is the officers, in consultation with other stakeholders and our partners in the councils, have prepared a response, and we passed it by the chair and vice chairs prior to submitting it. But we've brought that response to this board, and Transport Scotland has said if there are any other comments the board would like to make on that response or any observations of the process, then they're happy for it to be forwarded on to them for their consideration as well. The response itself is 6 pages and there's 4 appendices to it. So it really is one of those under the car bonnet looks at transport policy and where it's going. So there's quite a lot of detail in there. You'll be pleased to know, anticipate going through the detail of that just now. But in terms of our review of the work that has been undertaken, there were questions around how Transport Scotland are setting out the scope of this work in terms, on one hand, they seem to be very keen on encouraging small scale, more local interventions like bike hire schemes cycle lanes, whereas they're also going all the way up to major road and rail investments. But there's also some confusion in that they're saying we don't really want revenue proposals in here, and they're also trying to steer away from interventions on the local road network. So it seems a bit of a mixture in terms of how they're pitching it, whereas the previous strategic transport projects review was quite clear in that it really was the major strategic pieces that linked Scotland's cities together. There's 20 interventions that have been almost fast-tracked going forward, and in and of themselves those measures are fine. A lot of them correspond with our regional transport strategy, which is good to see. However, again, many of these measures, if they were to be taken through, don't really lay with Transport Scotland themselves. They would lay with local authorities or regional transport strategies. And again, they haven't really teased that relationship out about how they see this piece of work and the delivery mechanisms. There's an even longer list of schemes they want to appraise in the next phase of work, which would take them through to the summer. And again, there's such a wide range of interventions and groupings of schemes, it's quite hard to see a logical coherence to the measures that they're selecting. Not that what they're suggesting is bad in itself, but certainly it's quite hard to see where the outcomes of this work will lead and how that will be delivered. So overall, we've asked some questions of Transport Scotland. We've sort of suggested they go away and do a little bit more thinking, and so we can get a little bit more clarity, and perhaps that will be useful for them when they actually come up with some findings for this piece of work and think about the delivery pathways and whether or not that will need a revised approach to regional transport strategies, changes in funding allocations or something along those lines, because at the moment what they're putting forward for appraisal just doesn't seem to match up with the delivery proposals that they have to hand at this moment. So that's a very quick summary of the paper.
Thank you very much for that. Members, have you had a chance to read through those papers? Is there anything that people want to make further representation to Transport Scotland at this stage? Teacher.
No, nothing to add. I did want to commend the work that Paul has done on this. So it is an interesting proposal that we have in front of us from the Scottish Government on that. A huge range of interventions covering all sorts of different things. And I think some of the issues that Paul's picked up in the draft, well, I guess the draft response, absolutely hit the nail on the head. There is an uncertainty about the role of local authorities in all of this. I'll use the word uncertainty because we're in the pre-election period, so there is an uncertainty around that. There are huge questions about prioritisation and how some of these things are going to be prioritised. And yeah, I guess, because it covers such a wide range of interventions and possible actions and so on, there's that whole coherence piece. Does it actually hang together as a clear strategy? I'm not sure it does. There's much more work will be needed, I think, before they can put something forward and say this is a clear strategy for Scotland for the next however many years, that hangs together as one clear strategy that is deliverable, where the priorities are clearly defined, where the roles of not only Transport Scotland but other partners are clearly defined, and everybody knows what they're doing and everybody is working together. I think we're a long way from that, and I think the response picks up some of those challenges that are yet to be resolved. Thanks. Thanks
for that, and I would concur with some of the hows that are not really there yet. On that basis, then, can we note the publication endorsed the response that's already gone in, and having considered, we don't have any further representation to Transport Scotland at the moment. Agreed? Thanks very much, members. If we go on then, Paul, you again on the COVID-19 travel patterns.
Yeah, sure. So members will be well aware that we sort of bring this back regularly to them. The series of 10 survey reports have been completed. A wrap-up final report has been done and then put onto the Nestrans website to be viewed. I think I summarised about 6 or 7 key findings. Some of them are not surprising. Some of them are interesting and valid and have been recognised as being valuable by our stakeholders and our local authorities. Yes, trips have reduced. There has been a change in patterns of shopping, and we've got and travelling to work, and we can see that. We can see that people have often changed their frequency of doing activities as a result of the lockdown severities. We know that there's positivity toward walking and cycling, and also car use during these periods of lockdown. We know that there's concern about people who are using public transport, taxis and the like, although there is evidence in the last couple of surveys of that fear lessening, and there's a bit more positivity over the last couple of surveys on that, perhaps as the result of vaccinations, etc., and declining case numbers. We can see that over the longer term, there might be a reduction of peak time commuting of around about 10% of those who are working. And we know that some people, as we've reflected on earlier in the meeting, would like to do more flexible working. Doesn't mean they want to stay at home all the time, but perhaps they'd like to see that mixture coming in there. And also people are anticipating probably quite a significant drop of travelling around for business meetings, if it's possible to do it by Skype, such as the trips to the Central Belt and things like that. So overall, the work we've done over the last year has been viewed as important and useful, and we've been able to triangulate that with other data sources, and it's been valued by other stakeholders. In terms of the next steps, we'd like to continue to do 4 of these surveys next year, a far less frequency. We think that's appropriate because, again, it will continue to pick up some of these changing patterns as we go through. Hopefully, the continued journey out of lockdown. And we also want to start thinking about a wider, more comprehensive travel survey, which defines the baseline for a regional transport strategy, which was the original intention of this money a year or so ago. It wouldn't have been appropriate to do that at that time. So that's where we are. So again, that's the recommendations released to note the information and key findings in the report. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Can I ask, in reflecting on Councillor Carr's comments about the attitude towards spaces for people, particularly people coming in maybe from the Shire to the city, was that picked up at all? Are you aware in this attitude survey?
There was a separate piece of work that the city have done on spaces for people, because we were targeting the whole of the North East with these surveys. Only certain towns had experience of the spaces for people measures. So we deliberately separated the two, knowing that I know that my colleagues in the city were doing specific survey work on that. So we tried to take a separate, because we were also talking about people in rural areas and villages who wouldn't really have had direct experience of it. So this piece of work, I don't have that answer. I suspect that my colleagues in the city might have that answer, but I don't have that in front of me, I'm afraid.
Thanks very much. I've got Peter coming in and then Gail.
No, thanks very much, and thanks, Paul, for that report. I think it's a really important piece of work, and it shows how much things have changed over the past year and a bit. The question, of course, is how much they stay changed and how much things start to go back, and how much people go back to real meetings rather than pretend ones, and so on. I think the bit that we will need to watch very closely is the attitude to shopping, because I think of all the changes. We can move to online meetings, we can move back to physical meetings. That is not a very significant change. What will be a very significant change is if we move back to shopping and all the shops are shut, because the business has moved online, and the town centres will be massively hit by that, and will need a complete rethink about what town centres are for. And I think that the way things seem to be going to me at the moment, that could well become more of a reality than otherwise. And it's not something you can just say, well, we'll go back to physical meetings, we'll go back to physical shopping. It's not the same thing. So some real challenges in there. And I think your suggestion that we keep up the surveying 4 times a year for the next year is absolutely spot on. We need to see how the trends continue to develop, what the changes are, the extent to which the changes become embedded, become part of our culture, if you like, and the impact that will have on a whole range of different areas of work. Thanks.
I see Gail's put her hand down, so she's maybe.
No, sorry, Chair. No, it was just to confirm what Paul had said, that both constituent councils have complementary monitoring that they've done. That was a requirement of getting the Sustrans funding, but we've also used that to our advantage, just in terms of trying to sort of gauge the success of the various measures. So that has continued. We have certainly in Aberdeen City Council, we've received additional money from Sustrans, which has allowed us to keep that monitoring in place whilst those measures are still in place. So that will help to add to that picture.
Thanks. Colin?
Yeah, no, I think this bit of work's been really good and really valuable. In fact, that was my concern, was just dropping it to 4 times a year. I don't know how much money there is available to keep it going, but to have the information over time and over the same distances on the x-axis, would we not be better if we can to try and keep going at the same rate, so that we know that as we come out of this, as the changes develop, that we have something sort of real time against each of the changes and the relaxation restrictions.
Paul, do you want to respond to that?
The budget that has been set for this element took into account, because we got grant funding for this from Pass for All last year, which enabled us to do the frequency that we had. We don't have that grant funding available for the coming year, and so I guess we were balancing up the rate of change that we had seen in the month-by-month surveys, while still trying to protect that the changes that we had seen. So I guess perhaps if we had more money, yes, we could have done it every month, but the view was, on balance, that a quarterly reporting was possibly about right, given the change, the changes that we had seen.
How much money are we talking about here, Paul? It might be worth just having a relook at that and seeing if there's any available.
Yeah, I mean, we could do. I mean, we instead of doing monthly, we could do bi-monthly. If we, I mean, obviously doing four times a year, that's every 3 months. We could do it 6 times every 2 months.
And is it something that you would want to load towards the first 6 months of the year, given that that's when COVID is still going to be with us, rather than
I would still. My recommendation would still be to spread it over the year, because I think that some of the changes are still going to persist, and some of the adaptations are going to persist. So I would probably want to cover the full year. And I guess the question is that frequency. What we were seeing on a month-by-month basis was often not much change, and often when we looked at the surveys, you began to see more of a change over, say, a 2 or 3 month period. It wasn't, we had to look at 2 or 3 surveys consequentially to sort of pick out what the trends were, because it seemed to take that amount of time to see the difference between them.
Colin, you wanted to come back in? Oh, you're on mute, Colin.
Yeah, totally agree about keeping it going for a year, and on that, my point was, if we had actual physical changes in the COVID restrictions, like we know that we're just coming up to be able to go into Aberdeen from the Shire and things like that, there's going to be actual step changes. And if we have too long a period, we're going to get a couple of those step changes. So we're not really going to see what the effect of each of those step changes is over 3 months, where we would be maybe over a month or possibly a 2 month period.
Okay, well, that's some food for thought, Paul. The recommendation is to note the information. So if the board are happy to do that, and we'll look forward to seeing the next one when it comes.
We're committed to thinking about that frequency question, and we'll look with the budget and see what we can do.
Thank you. Okay, members, on to item 4.5. We've got Jenny Anderson, who's going to talk us through the Nestrans Risk Register.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides details on the review of the Nestrans Risk Register that's been undertaken to ensure significant risks are identified, evaluated and controlled. A number of normal business risks are mitigated as a result of Nestrans having service level agreements with their constituent councils for ICT, finance, legal, personnel and public relations, because each authority already has risk management systems in place for these services. The cause and impact of identified risks relevant to Nestrans have been considered against how likely they are to happen and their impact to determine an inherent risk assessment score. And any mitigating actions and current progress against the risks are also presented and used to determine a residual risk assessment score, and a key to the scoring chart that was used is contained in Appendix 1. The revised risk register is presented for consideration in Appendix 2, and it shows any amendments to the previous version that was last reported to the board in 2018 and track changes to help identify what the proposed revisions are. And you'll notice from the changes to the numbering that the previous risks have been reordered, and this was done to group similar categories together under the various headings such as corporate, financial and technical and the like. The previous risk relating to interruption to the operation in Nestrans has also been split into 3 separate risks now as a result of the differing impact and likelihood each were thought to have. It's now represented under the headings of loss of lease, interruption due to a major event and recovery from disruption. And the board has been asked to consider the attached risk register and approve its implementation. And I'm happy to answer any questions or to incorporate any amendments or additions to the register that the board wants to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Members, any additions that you want to make to the risk register or any comments? I guess for me, there was just to add in at number 1, Jenny, under the mitigating actions where we have the director who sits on the governance group. It's just to mention, it might be worth putting in there that the chair also sits on the NTS2 delivery board.
Oh, right, thank you.
Has been involved in the working with working with partners document. And perhaps with members' agreement that we do consider the registered approval, but I think it would also be very helpful to come back on an annual basis, and so that the board can maybe consider it each year.
Okay.
Maggie.
I was just wondering whether the impact of major disruption like a pandemic would be as much as 3 in future. I mean, it appears to me that we've actually managed it pretty well, and that should it happen again, we'd be better prepared for it. Also, I guess that disruption doesn't necessarily have to just be a pandemic. It could be any other kind of disruption, and maybe some other kind of disruption. Now I'm talking myself out of it. Might actually have more of an impact because it could wipe out our IT, which at least coronavirus hasn't done. Might have wiped out everything else, but IT is still functioning. Yeah, don't know. Maybe yeah, should have maybe thought that one through more before I said it.
We had a lot of debate on the scoring, the impacts over quite a few different categories: health and safety, service and reputation, and financial. Because sometimes we thought, oh, that's a bit extreme, but then the financial one, the categories as well, can quickly put you onto category 5.
I mean, I guess unless it's putting us into red, it maybe doesn't matter whether it's green or amber, but yeah, we need to really worry if it's red. Don't know.
I'd be happy just to leave it as it is at the moment, Maggie, and we can, you know, if we're looking at it on an annual basis, we can maybe think that through once we've got out of the pandemic. And
yeah, fine.
Okay. Can we agree the recommendations on page 89 with the addition of coming back every year, members? Thanks. Right, on to 4.6. Kelly's going to take us through the equalities outcomes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so this report is basically just to update the board on where we are with our equalities duties under the Equality Act 2010. Nestrans is required to produce equality outcomes and also to produce a mainstreaming report, both of which are in the appendices of this report. One of the positives of developing our regional transport strategy over the last 2 years is we've obviously done an awful lot of stakeholder engagement, which has included a lot of the groups that we're looking at under equalities. So we have actually, as part of preparing our equality outcomes this time, we've been able to use the assessments from the regional transport strategy to help shape our equalities outcomes. So as part of the regional transport strategy, you'll be aware that we did an equalities impact assessment, a Fairer Scotland duty and a health inequalities impact assessment. So those impact assessments have been really useful for us to pull together our equalities outcomes. I'll quickly go through the two that we've identified as something that we should focus on. The first one is evidence to provide a better understanding of how all people and their protected characteristics in the northeast of Scotland travel and any inequalities they may face whilst travelling or trying to access transport. Now, this has come about basically because we've done so much engagement over the last couple of years that we've got anecdotal evidence of things not being quite right, but we don't actually have a huge amount of data, particularly around the protected characteristics. So we've pulled together an equality outcome to actually try and gather data around travel and the protected characteristics. And it will link in very much with what Paul was saying earlier around doing a comprehensive travel survey for the RTS. We'll try and build in the equality side of it in that comprehensive travel survey that we'll be doing as part of the regional transport strategy in order to actually be able to deliver on this equality outcome. The second one is very much a general equality outcome, and it links very much to the regional transport strategies, accessibility and equality priorities and the pillar on equality, and it's everyone can access transport safely with an integrated service that provides accessible information, appropriate assistance and support from transport staff. So it's much more generic and all across the region, sort of affecting all modes of transport. So we thought it was quite important to have one around the data and a very much a general access. We've sent these equality outcomes round our consultative forum and we have had some feedback. And as Rab mentioned in his director's report, I was asked to speak to the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland on this a couple of weeks ago as well. So we have done a bit of consultation as well around this. So we're hoping that the board will endorse these equality outcomes. The mainstreaming report that's in the appendix is very much around Nestrans as an organisation, as an employer and the board. So what is the gender makeup of the staff and of the board and all of the policy employment side of things rather than what we deliver as Nestrans, but more how we are as an organisation and our staff. And if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thanks very much. Over to members, really. Any questions on this one? Councillor Hutchison, Michael.
Yeah, but it was just on, and I realise we're probably more than a year out from the council elections when there's probably going to be the most changes to the council and make up of this. When you talk about contacting the councils ahead of appointing the representatives, is that going to be just the council as a body, or is it going to be the group leaders within the council who are likely to be appointing people from within their groups, if that makes sense in the first instance? So I help and then come back and I've maybe got a follow-up.
Kelly?
To be honest, I think Rab might be better to answer this question than myself. I'm not 100% sure how the councils choose their councillors on the board. We just get informed that these are the councils councillors that are going to sit on it. Rab, are you able to
assist
with this one?
Thanks, Kel. We've taken it on that Nestrans will probably be required to look at our non-councillor board members in the future, and that we will be able to ask the local authorities to try and give consideration to diversification when they allocate or when they propose members for the board. So as you say, Councillor, I think it'll probably be after the election next year. It'll be something that we'll give consideration to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, did you want to come back on that?
I was just in way of a follow-up in terms of, because it's obviously kind of, I know how Aberdeen works. I assume Aberdeen shows similar, whereby the council gets a set number of board places and then it's allocated amongst the groups, and then the groups individually allocate folk to the slots that they've got. I realise it's quite a bit out, and it's probably going to, I assume we'll probably have another one of these just before the next council election, or is this, if it's going to be an annual thing? Just in terms of kind of nudging political leaders to look at this, it might be something just to kind of, the ideal point maybe between the election when they know who their councillors are and the first council meeting back when they're kind of needing to look at folk. I'm not quite sure. It was just to kind of, if it might be helpful to nudge political leaders as well as the council itself to kind of encourage folk, and it might be worth looking at maybe something from the existing board saying, realise that some of us will be coming off of it because of elections, and it might be worth something like that from all of us to encourage group leaders to look at that. I'm just kind of, I realise that maybe it sounds a bit vague. I do apologise.
I kind of get your drift, and it's quite difficult to ensure that happens. But Kelly?
I was just going to say, in terms of our reporting, our next mainstreaming report is due in 2 years' time. So it's a biannual rather than annual report that we're required to do.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, it's certainly something that, you know, all political parties are aware of, and as a board, we're definitely aware of what, you know, to what extent we can make sure it happens. You know, the figures are what they are, and it's quite a small number as well. It's not you know, a vast number on the board, so that's got its own challenges. I wanted to bring up under the employment duty. I just wondered, we didn't have a lone working in that list of policies, and I just wondered if we did have that, and also if we have anything around digital inequality. You know, it's certainly come to the fore over the course of the pandemic. So it was just maybe to have a think about that, Kelly.
Yeah, I'll certainly add those two to the list, and we can have a look at that, definitely.
Councillor Hutchinson, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in again?
Sorry, it was a legacy hand there.
No bother at all. So if members have had an opportunity to do that, yeah, what is it? Note the report, approve the outcomes, and also note the mainstreaming report. If we're happy to do that, can we agree? Perfect, thank you. And then on to number 5.1, we've got John Barons, who's going to take us through the moving towards net zero event. Hi, John.
Thank you, Chair. The paper is there for members, and it's to kind of note the background information, the key outcomes and the proposed next steps. Hopefully I won't have more technical failings and issues today, but it was a really good opportunity and forum for such a wide range of organisations and individuals, and across both local authorities particularly, to get involved and to listen. Despite the negatives around the tech side. It was really nice to hear the kind of feedback we got after it. Hopefully you've all managed to now see with the benefit of technology, we've kind of got the presentations online. Unfortunately, I don't have the Q&A, which has taken a bit more work and effort, which will hopefully be bearing my fruit in the longer term, that we'll have these online in the imminently. And perhaps more excitingly, which is typical of me, that was good, but what next? We hope to maybe have a kind of bit more of a focused group with a few decision makers and those from the kind of national organisations, where we can hopefully help form a bit of a plan that it's clear that a lot of the applications for funding and support from some of the national organisations will become increasingly competitive. So we, like other authorities and partners and organisations and third sector, will kind of maybe need to up our game with some of that to kind of help. And if there are any questions, I'll gladly answer them on that.
Yeah, thanks very much, John, and absolutely delighted to see 140 attendees going along. Yes, there were technical issues, we can't deny that, but I think some of the presentations and were excellent, and I think looking at it in the round, it was a really good event that I think we can work on, as you rightly said. Any members want to come in on that report? If not, again, it is a noting report on the information, the outcomes, and the proposed next steps. So look forward to more of that in the future. And then on to rail matters. I think that's back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Councillor MacDonald. There's 4 items on the rail updates report. The first one, it's just to note that Network Rail continue to do their work following the derailment at Calmont, and they've produced some update reports on wider network resilience, earthworks and weather monitoring as well, and the link to that is provided there. So obviously, and we know we've been talking to Network Rail about their absolute stepped up commitment to better monitoring and investment in this key area. The next element is good news in terms of progression on the inch accessibility study, and that the detailed appraisal has now been completed and submitted to Transport Scotland, following again an awful lot of work with the communities, an awful lot of work with the rail stakeholders as well to identify a preferred solution. That preferred solution at the end of the day was a recommendation for lifts, an overbridge with lifts rather than a path across the level crossing. At the end of the day, when that was detailed, done the detailed appraisal, that was seen still to leave a lot of people short of the accessibility that was required at that location. So yeah, we're excited about this progression. We're pleased to put it to Transport Scotland, and we're also pleased to see the commitment across a lot of their policy documents recently about accessibility at rail stations. So we are hopeful that, given Inch's unique situation and its remoteness, and it's also very wide rural catchment, that there is a very strong case for action at this place, as there has been at some of the other stations on the North Line recently as well. There's a quick note there about the Aberdeen to Lawrencekirk strategic corridor study, and that a case for change report has been submitted to Transport Scotland. Transport Scotland have come back with comments. Some of those comments are going to be quite difficult to deal with at this precise moment, because they're asking for more evidence of the scale of the problem and the accessibility issues there. And it will probably take until perhaps later in the summer, when we see people out and about more, we actually speak to people, that we might be able to resolve some of the comments that Transport Scotland have had, notwithstanding the work that has been done on this work and the indications of the feasibility that we have already on that piece of work. And finally, the fourth point there is to note that Transport Scotland have indicated their intention to take in the ScotRail franchise and to operate it as an operator of last resort from next year, and that arrangement is similar to what's happened at several other franchises across the UK network. LNER, Northern Trains and Transport for Wales are currently operating under that arrangement at the moment. So there's 4 recommendations: to note the update on the derailment at Carmont, note the progress at Inch, note the progress on the multimodal study at Lawrence Kirk, Aberdeen to Lawrence Kirk, and the update on the ScotRail franchise. Thank you.
Thanks. Any comments on the rail matters in front of us? Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. You won't be surprised to know that I'm really pleased with the progress around Inch. It is, as I said earlier to the professor, something that we've been pushing for this for years and years and years, and to actually have got to the point where we have a really good document. I read it through, and to my mind, it makes a really robust case as to why Inch needs to be addressed, recognising there are other stations, of course, across Scotland where there are similar challenges. But the case for Inch, I think, is extremely well made. Let's hope that Transport Scotland take it seriously, and for what actually is a relatively small sum of money, actually, in the great scheme of things, this thing can be addressed for once and for all, and we can bring Inch Station up into the 21st century, which will be magnificent. So totally endorse that report, and I'd be happy actually if the minute said we commend the progress rather than simply noting it, because it is a major step along the way. Thanks.
Totally agree with that. Colin, you wanted to come in as well.
Sorry, I can't find my microphone. Yeah, no, I agree. It's good, a lot of good progress and a good report. I was just wondering if it probably came in too late for this, but the press reports about this new group pushing for more rail development in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. What's our response to that going to be? Are we just sort of monitoring where it goes at the moment, or have we got any official response to it?
I think our response is very well detailed in the regional transport strategy and the strategic transport appraisal work that we've done. Colin, we've looked at the feasibility of the work going up to Peterhead and Fraserburgh and Ellen, and yeah, it'd be lovely to have, but the cost and the benefits at the moment do not seem to weigh themselves up in how we would like it to be. Similarly, we've looked at the D-side line, and again, lovely to have, but I think the view is if we were trying to make a case for that, it would be very, very difficult under current guidance to actually manage to make a case for that at this time, based on all the guidance that as officers and that we know we're put under by Network Rail, ScotRail and things. It is a long way from being a close shot. So I think we're very keen to continue to focus our efforts on the improvement of the local rail service between Inverurie and Montrose, to continue to explore how can we get local stations north and south of Aberdeen Station, continue to explore improvements on the line up to Inverness, and continue to support the investment on the rail service between Aberdeen and the Central Belt. And I think that maximises the benefits that we have from and maximises the opportunities that we have at the moment. And there will be other solutions that we can continue to look at, and we will continue to support, the ongoing looking at these things. But just at the moment, the view is that it might be difficult to make that case in the way that we would like that case to be made.
No, I totally agree. I was just wondering if we were going to meet with this group or to put over that, so that it doesn't become a snowball that hits us in the press every 3 months or so.
We did respond in the press. We were contacted and did give a response. So we'll do that. We don't have any plans to do that at the moment, Colin, but it is something that we can think about. So, happy members to note the report in front of us, the 4 elements of that? Thank you. On to then.
Just in terms of what Councillor Argyle had said, you asked whether you wanted to amend the report to say commend progress rather than note progress. Do you want to agree that?
Yes, please. Can we agree that, members, to change the recommendation? Thank you. Thank you for that, Mark. Keeping me right. And on to the progress report. Any questions on the progress report in front of us, members? That's for noting then. And on to publications and consultations. Kelly, I think you were going to take us through the town centres one, and then Paul on the union connectivity.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The town centres has obviously been raised quite often already this board meeting, so this was just giving an update on a new publication, A New Future for Scotland's Town Centres, which looked at the impact of climate change, Brexit, wellbeing, health inequalities, and the impact of COVID-19 that town centres and city centres face. And it was just really a summary to say that the report offered up 3 high-level recommendations, and one of those was very much about looking at town centres and city centres in terms of national planning, and the second one was to review current tax and funding and development systems to ensure that town and city centres can still be the heart of our communities, and that included a recommendation to introduce an out of town car parking space levy. That was the main sort of transport implication, if you like, of the report. And again, looking at funding for demonstration projects. It was very much about how we can try and maintain and improve our town centres and how vital they were, particularly in our area. We've got lots of smaller towns, and then Aberdeen is the sort of region centre, so we'll be keeping a close eye on that. Obviously, Nestrans are currently involved in a number of projects looking to do similar things to what this publication was, and it was just really an overview for the board to make you aware that there is research happening, and we'll keep the board up to date as more things get published, so we're up to date with what's happening.
Thank you.
Happy to take any questions.
Any questions on Kelly's element? Paul, union connectivity review. Oh, Philip, did you want to come in on Kelly's?
Please, Chair. Yes, thank you. So can I just ask? So presumably this mentions Scottish towns, so forth. So this is where the AWPR and the Rose hierarchy would come into play, is it?
You mean in terms of like locking in the benefits?
Yes, absolutely.
Or just in general? Yeah, absolutely. It's looking at that. I mean, this actual publication was about the whole of Scotland and didn't really mention specific towns or cities. But obviously, we would be looking very much at Aberdeen and our local towns within Aberdeenshire as well. Yeah. And how they're impacted. But obviously, the WPR has a big impact on that and makes it much easier for people to travel into Aberdeen, but also from people to Aberdeen to travel into towns within Aberdeenshire as well.
Yeah, so clearly COVID has put the kibosh on that, hasn't it, for the time being? But is there a timeline? I've not looked at the URL, the report at the URL, but what sort of timeline are you looking at for that?
Oh, that's a good point, actually. I can't remember exactly what the timeline was. I think it was very much looking to see how we can change policies, which is obviously going to be a longer timeline. I'm not aware that there was a specific, we're wanting to do this by 2023 or something like that. I think it was more just a future plan and what the recommendations that we should be looking at when we're already looking at changing these policies. They were recommending ones that should be potentially raised up as priorities.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm guessing it's just one piece of a much bigger jigsaw that's in terms of research and changes to policy going forward.
Yeah, it's just something that's been published recently that we thought you'd be interested in seeing.
Thanks. Paul, on the union connectivity review?
Yeah, at the last meeting, we gave an overview of a response that we submitted just before Christmas on a sort of call for evidence for this piece of work, which has been sponsored by the UK government. The interim report has just been published, and interestingly, nice to see some of the points that we made in that response prior to Christmas, or just after Christmas, right enough, has come through. And Sir Peter Hendy has talked about the importance of rail connections, both to HS2 and to importance of rail freight, the importance of connections across countries. Talks about air links, for those links particularly that can't easily be transferred onto rail just because of the length of time. And I've also talked about the importance of where there are green ports or free ports. And I know that's something that has been looked at and is being looked at in this area, and the connectivity around that side of things as well. So there's some key themes that I think we brought up in our response has been reflected as well. He also says he's keen that the existing trans-European network that was established under the European Union should be replaced by a UK equivalent. And again, I think we made that point at that time. And he's also referring to the importance of making sure that the actions do contribute to the net carbon zero by 2050. So the themes that we suggested have been picked up, which is good. He's going to go away and do some more work with the civil servants, and we're expecting a report in summer 2021. And I think in the meantime, the Department for Transport are talking about a levelling up fund as well, which is being made available to local authorities, looking at some of these differences. So yeah, there's another area of policy development which is of interest to us in the North East. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any comments or questions on those two publications, consultations? Councillor Bell, Philip.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm intrigued with this green ports as opposed to free ports. I appreciate the Scottish Government have decided they want to call a free port a green port, and of course the idea of a free port is to give you certain tax benefits which are recognised and understood around the world. Would a green port, do you think, work the same way? Would people know what it was for and what it did? I mean, we would know in Scotland.
An interesting point. Obviously, that decision's been made by the government. It wasn't a choice that was made locally, and I guess we just have to make the best of the opportunity for this region that we've been provided with the guidance that has been issued. Yeah, so no, I wouldn't be able to answer your specific point whether everybody would be aware of that, but as an officer, I could just state that.
Yeah. Okay. So we just need to work with what we're given. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
And I think it's in the paper. It says free ports, and in Scotland they're called green ports. So I think that's probably what we will see going forward, just to make sure there's no confusion. But I think they're one and the same thing.
Yeah, thanks.
Can we note the contents of this report on the two elements? Thank you. And on to information bulletin. John, thank you.
Yes, Chair. Both papers there, slightly long as is my typical wont. Firstly, some really positive news on these. The e-cargo bikes, whilst already a tremendous positive in themselves and an exciting project, it'll be clear to members, like has been said in some other topics, that the impact on us all and local businesses and this is maybe still not yet as much as a good news story as it perhaps will prove to be, hopefully in the longer term, and perhaps we may see that increasingly evident in the coming months. I've summarised some of what we think the team are some of the salient points in the paper. One point that's maybe of particular interest is part of our regular monitoring with each of the users, which are a kind of a bit of a cross-section in themselves. They've each provided comment that the bikes themselves are not turning as much heads as perhaps they did in the first early stages of this project. Clearly more people are becoming more used to seeing them on the streets, which can only be a good thing. There are now a few other local businesses, some of whom are obviously adapting and becoming increasingly entrepreneurial in their own rights, who've invested themselves in similar bikes. And it'll be no surprise to some in the call that I'm in regular dialogue with staff at local bike shops, and whilst these businesses are among the few who have been busier than they've ever been in recent times, our local retailers are all becoming themselves more used to dealing with e-cargo bikes, offering them for sale, seeing them, not just ours first and for servicing and repair, but also indeed are now getting interest for potential orders and are selling them, including the various kind of chassis variations that you get that allow for them to be adapted to family use, which is really pleasing. So despite approaching a year in, and to quote the carpenters, if I may, this is maybe the project that's only just begun. Turning to the counters, probably the first point I'd make is I've kind of had to be maybe converted to the importance of these in the bigger picture. I'm a practical person and maybe would much rather perhaps help with the greater we towards implementing and installing much more sought after infrastructure to support walking and cycling. However, having been convinced of the benefits that they can and do bring by good colleagues and who I deal with daily in Nestrans and Cycling Scotland, it's become clear to me that because of how the information has been used to such good effect, positive effect recently, locally and nationally, that having a more widespread network of counters can be used as good evidence back to the kind of what I maybe said a few minutes ago, but they may be increasingly competitive funding applications, so that Nestrans and colleagues across teams in both councils can set about to maybe hopefully delivering that infrastructure. It's been clear that during the past year or so, the councils in particular have probably only shared much of the information from the counters for probably the first time. For members' information, there's around 23 sites in the city with slightly more in the Shire. The local information is also shown in the vast majority of locations similar, very stark increases in footfall and number of bikes in passing the counters. The national releases have kind of led to me being inundated in a good way with correspondence from interested individuals locally, asking why the national releases hadn't featured any local locations. And in closing summary, it's clear, I think, for all that we've managed to broker a very good deal with the National Active Travel Delivery Partners, who I must thank for being particularly helpful to me in guidance and support, and working towards this hopefully very soon to be implemented comprehensive spread of counters, the locations of which have been suggested by officers across both councils to best effect. And I'll add the most recent update from last week in the chat sidebar from Cycling Scotland. And most importantly, perhaps above all, this good news story, this deal and work on it has meant that there'll be no cost to Nestrans or both local authorities for the installation, monitoring and the servicing of these things for up to 5 years, which will allow the monies to be allocated among the many other possible projects that I have up my sleeve, and others have as well. It probably could have cost us in the region of 150 to 200k.
That's good news. Thanks very much for that report, John. Any questions or members content to note that information bulletin? Stuff onto the conferences and presentations. Not that there are many, but they're there for us to have a look at. Any questions on those? If not, final report in front of us is the pending business and reports for future meetings. Rab, can I ask, one of the things that just has been coming out of this meeting is about how we sell the story of what we have done in our previous regional transport strategy, and even, pulling out the things that Professor Gray brought to our attention. How easy would it be, or would it be possible just to have a graphic, one-page graphic map of the Northeast, our area, and to show just graphically on that, must be the geographer in me, just what we have achieved, because I think you know, sometimes we have all the screeds of stuff that we see, but just seeing something visually, a bit like the one pager that we get from the report. I don't know how possible it is to do this, but I just thought that might be something that we could have for a future meeting to add to the list.
Thanks, Chair. I'm very happy to go away and give that some thought and try and bring something back to the next meeting. It's always, in our region, it's always notoriously difficult to get a map that covers the detail and the geographic spread of the region. But yeah, leave that with us as a challenge and we'll try and bring something back. Yeah, I mean, I guess Nestrans has now been 15 years in place. And we always do emphasise that it's not just us who are delivering, but that the delivery partners, whether it's local authorities, Transport Scotland, or even the private sector in terms of the harbours, the airport, etc., are all working towards collective goals. And I think it could be really powerful to try and show how much has changed in that 15-year period and how much has been achieved. So I'll take that away as a challenge and try and bring a report to the next meeting.
Yes, even just things like the double tracking of the Aberdeen to Inverness rail has made a huge difference, and sometimes that just gets lost. Kirsty, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, I was just going to say, and it's possibly something I should have mentioned in my report, is that as part of putting the new strategy on our website, we are working on a sort of map-based visualization of some of the things that are in the strategy as it is now, and very much as a tool that we can maybe somehow demonstrate progress and the plans and sort of illustrate the delivery plan aspect of it. So it's maybe something that we can bring into that. You know, these are, you know, we can maybe have a look at how we can bring in some of the things that have already been delivered through the previous strategy, perhaps. But we'll have a look at. We can have a look at that, absolutely.
Yeah, and it might be too difficult given what Professor Gray said about the geographical area of the Northeast is quite complex. But I certainly remember, and Maggie will back me up, the modern transport system where we had the the semicircle of the AWPR and the fingers coming out and the park and rides and out to the connections with the rail and roads up north and so on. Is still seared in my memory of something that, you know, on a page I could relate to. So it was just to have a think about that. Anything else, members, before I draw the meeting to a close? I'm not seeing any hands up. So can I say thank you very much to everyone to attended, and we'll certainly pass on our thanks again to Professor Gray for his contribution at the beginning of the meeting, and hope to see you all soon, probably virtually again in June, but hopefully very soon as we all get inoculated or vaccinated or whatever, that we'll be able to meet again in person and have a cup of tea and a Tunnock's tea cake in the Woodhill house. I'm looking forward to that. Take care, everyone. Safe journey home.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.